I know that sometimes people are worried that with AI, they're gonna not learn how things work, but I feel like part of staying at that kinda higher level for me has been, while it's working, if there's something it's having trouble with or there's something sort of architectural or strategy-wise that I'm trying to understand, I'm spending more time reading and thinking and sort of synthesizing information as opposed to I don't feel like personally I learn as much when I'm kind of doing the thing. So I think that's another part of it that can be underestimated is how much it can lead to you kind of understanding more.
Before we get started with the show, I wanted to offer you the chance potentially of a lifetime. If you're looking to get your brand in front of the boldest thinkers in business, this is the place to do it. The Unlearn podcast is downloaded in over 85 countries with a growing audience of over 100,000 listeners per month. That includes C-suite leaders, startup founders, and executives from Fortune 500 companies to scaling startups. We're ranked in the top 1% of business podcasts on Spotify and Apple across multiple regions. But our listeners just don't stream, they stick around, with 85% completing the entire show on their first listen. If your brand wants to align with bold ideas, breakthrough thinking, and a global audience that's not afraid to challenge the startup quo, get in touch. For the first time ever, we're offering sponsorship opportunities on the show, and we'd love to have you with us.
Enjoying the podcast? Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube. This way, you won't miss any episode, and it greatly supports our podcast.
Today in the Unlearn podcast, we're exploring how AI is reshaping the way we build, from products to companies and even ourselves. I'm excited to welcome Jeremy Shankle, a brilliant product thinker, engineer, and systems strategist who's been doing cutting-edge work at the intersection of AI coding, product development, and personal productivity. Jeremy's not just talking about the future, he's building it. I've had the chance to work closely together with Jeremy for over 2 years now in our venture studio, Nobody Studios, where he leads technology. Jeremy's been instrumental in helping us reimagine how AI can accelerate everything from ideation to execution and product development, whether it's building tools to make developers 10 times faster or creating systems that help founders stay focused and effective. His work is driving real change. In this episode, we dig into how AI is transforming the product development process, what it means to lead with systems thinking, and how to stay productive in an era of constant disruption. We've packed this with lots and lots and lots of personal examples, both from us working together in the studio, trying to build companies and improve our productivity. I think you're going to really love this show as a practical way to understand how much of an impact these tools can have on your own personal productivity and your companies. So before we get started, let's go back and see how it all began for Jeremy.
It was in December when I really got into the tools. So before that, LLMs were really interesting, but but tools became really interesting. The ability for agents to call different things to do web searches for you and to synthesize that information, and the ability for it to change code for you was really interesting. As far as, like, overall in my overall journey, it's kind of feels like a continuation and just kind of an exciting time again. I was thinking about, so the first time I did a website was 30 years ago this year. I did a website for the town that my father was running. That was my first experience with web design. But 10 years before that, when I was, 5 years old, it was the first time I looked at code. So it was kind of as soon as I could read, my parents got a Tandy 1000, and, I started playing around with BASIC and crashing this thing all the time, and that felt really interesting too. And then my mother was a book editor, was the first time I used a modem or saw a modem. So that was a few years later, maybe 1989. She got a modem specifically to send text back and forth, with a publisher. And then I actually went to school. I actually decided in 1999 to go to school for something other than, programming 'cause I'd already had a startup with a friend in high school doing, web design. But I decided to go for politics, and then I studied community economic development, and every project I went on, every org I was a part of needed someone who who had technology experience. So I always would kind of fall into that role, and then decided to do it full time, um, full time, um, really around the Web 2 stuff. Um, so every step along the way, every step for me has felt kind of natural, and AI kind of feels like a natural extension where um, we had the ability to search, right? To first to put up information, then to search for that information, and then to interact with that information with Web 2. And now we're really getting to the point where we can take that information and turn it into something much more personal.
Yeah, no, and it's been amazing to just you know, follow along on that story, right? Certainly, one of the things when we were starting the studio, we always had this notion of like we needed volume of power to do and go after the sort of ambitions that we have of like building all these companies. And a lot of that was initially sort of focused around people power. Right, we did a crowdfunding specifically get like 1,000 nobodies that could help us do this volume, if you will, of sort of work. But literally, it feels like this moment, maybe whatever it was, 6, 8, 9 months ago, where suddenly then another penny dropped. Where, yeah, sure, we still need people, but it's not a volume of people. It's actually less people, but using these tools in conjunction with them to do a huge volume of work. And that sort of has one of the things that certainly has shocked me. Like I was thinking when we built startup teams, we needed at least 6 people to have a solid MVP, a couple of engineers, a product person, a business person, marketing. Now I'm thinking two and 3 people is more than enough to get these things moving, which is sort of almost like a 50 or more percent reduction in physical humans augmented with these amazing technologies. So as someone who has really gone deep on this, the thing again that I really enjoyed when you said in December, I'm going to run my whole life. I'm just going to go all in on this. I'm going to get, the full power OpenAI subscription. And I'm just going to do everything with this to see really to push it. So, what were some of the things you've definitely learned over the last sort of 6 to 9 months? If anything, I feel like you have only higher conviction on this now, and it's almost like the only way you want to work. So talk us through some of the things you had to unlearn by, if you will, setting that constraint for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, as far as work goes, I've always been kind of a dual role player. So kind of leading initiatives, doing strategy, but also writing code. And there's kind of this, at least for me, I kind of can struggle between those two kind of ways of thinking. Like, like if I'm gonna do something like this podcast, I have to stop coding at least an hour before, sort of get myself in a different headspace. And that's kind of traditionally how I've had to work and think about things. What I'm noticing is that I spend a lot more time at the strategic level. So if I can give things to an AI programmer, it makes me think about it a different way, the code itself. So as opposed to me going from kind of a product manager hat to a developer hat, or from a team lead or director hat to a principal engineer hat, I can kind of I can kind of keep my thoughts clear because there's like a better mapping. So I spend a lot more of my time able to think strategically while still getting those things you need to on a startup, or really, kind of any level, whether it's in big consulting or startups. You're always kind of jumping between things, and I've really enjoyed what I've unlearned, which is that I have to kind of switch personas myself to sort of get things done. And it's also given me the ability to not put things off. So, um, actually at work and in life, like yesterday, I was working on a project, at Nobody, and somebody had come back with a few, like, small things that you'd probably wanna before you would have just thrown in the backlog, and I just opened up OpenAI's new tool Codex and just put those bugs in, and it just fixed them all within an hour. So, they were small things, but they're the kind of context switching things that you get stuck on. At the same time, as I was doing those bugs, I realized I wanted to find my son, a basketball club here in Berlin. So I just and what basketball they used so that I could get him the right basketball so we could start playing with it, and then he could go to, kind of enjoy it before he went. But I didn't, that's another thing I would have put off to, if not the end of the day, probably the weekend. And I just kind of started a deep research task. And what I kind of specifically asked it was, I'm looking for a basketball, but I'm looking for a club. And then what basketballs do they use? So I could kind of do it all in one kind of, and that would have taken hours and hours before.
Subtly, the story and examples you're sharing here are probably what I think is the most profound aspect of this. Before, you used a word that really resonated with me, is context switch. And even as you're describing, like, the way you work when you're thinking from product strategically, you're thinking from engineering, like that cost is so expensive in work. Your example, you need an hour to sort of make that transition, right? Which is very normal for people. But most people don't think they need it, and it ends up costing them 4 hours because they're context switching. But this idea, though, that you are almost becoming multi-threaded with the way that you start to work, I think is this whole other way of thinking and working and behaving, where, as you say, this classic thing where you're working on one of our startups, somebody reports some minor but time consuming bugs that need to be addressed, that are impacting the user experience, impacting their ability to move forward. And the fact that you can spin up a thread and give an assignment to an AI programmer to say, address these three things, and it runs it as a sort of parallel task, while you're also able to context switch and start planning something in your personal life for your son that's very meaningful. And both those things are happening in separate threads at the same time. I think this is one of the things, which again is such a great example, to start to think about people's potential for how they can work on multiple problems in a meaningful way simultaneously, and the cognitive load actually that's sort of removed, if you will, as well as the time that's removed. That's again one of the things that's very fascinating to me personally, about changing how people have to start thinking about work. Because a simple example, even for myself, right? Like, I use co-pilots in, I would say, 95% of the meetings I'm in, unless it's a very specific thing where maybe it's a high stakes meeting or we both don't want to record it. I'll generally record everything. But if I'm in any meeting, typically I would say within at least 3 to 5 minutes afterwards, I'm able to send people a recap of the meeting that we were in, all the talking points, all the action points, the assignments. Now we're able to start to put those straight into, if we've a ticketing system, whatever your favorite one is, and auto create tasks and assignments. And people sort of freak out. I actually am starting to notice, because they think when I'm in a meeting talking like just you and I are, like focused on talking to each other, and then 3 minutes after the meeting, I'm sending them this super robust breakdown of the points we talked about, what we are agreeing to do, who needs to do what, follow-up dates, and then it's all loaded up in the system to track. It sort of blows people's mind, where it's all the stuff you would love to do, but from a discipline point of view, but you never have the cycles, because you're going from meeting to meeting, or you're going from something to something. And typically you would have spent 3 or 4 hours at the end of a day, like writing up all your notes that are stale or confused. But so much of my own productivity now is, I don't have to worry about it. I can just put like 90% of my attention into the conversation, knowing that the auditing, the catalog, the recap is actually being taken care of. And my job really is only to review the review and then ship that out, which is so fresh in my mind when we finish meetings almost instantaneously. And I just feel like my productivity, my auditability is just skyrocketing at the moment. And I don't even think I'm using these tools effectively enough yet. It's amazing sort of experience to be having at the moment. So as an engineer, I know this is one of the things you've been really sort of championing in the studio too, as well, is like taking away all of this what people would have considered like overhead work on top of the real work. Can you talk a little bit about just what you've been doing in that space too as well? Because I think, again, for many people who aren't using these tools yet, I think this is probably one of the potential biggest performance improvements that companies can have, is the audit and tracking and capture and discipline of work that these tools can provide.
Yeah, one way I've started to use our project management tools combined with the code editing is they can talk to each other. So I'll have an agent in the code editor actually create tasks for me, or I'll create tasks directly from another chatbot like ChatGTP into our project management system and then send that directly to an agent to write the code. Um, it's funny because you talk about how like how much time some of those things would take, but yeah, I would say also for me, like it's things that you just decide you're not going to do because you're not, it's like I've never been in an organization that complained they had too many designers or like a team had too many developers on it. You never have too many people in a meeting, taking notes. So, it gives you the ability to have like a fully robust team in a way that was kind of impossible, even if you had a good budget before. So, I think one thing, you and me are talking about a lot in the studio and others are like how we can link those even more. And there's a lot of interesting, new tools for linking those as well out on the market automatically. So I think that's a huge thing that's going to grow over the next year as well, because more agent to agent and more agents within tools. So like we're noticing in the project management tools we use, they're starting to incorporate more AI and um every tool, whether it's GitHub or any tools, are starting to integrate them in new and interesting ways that are more and more behind the scenes, not just kind of the forefront, not just a ChatGPT thing, but it's kind of like, how you search is changing and how you create descriptions is changing and, what your tasks look like are changing because, before you would take notes and if it was even the end of the day, you might have forgotten 3 or 4 things, like, "Why did I write that down?" Or you sometimes, if you're in a meeting and you're taking notes and you're also participating in that meeting, it's really easy to miss something important because you're either the one who thought of it or, you're in a conversation with someone and you just forget something, and then a day later or 6 hours, 6 meetings, 6 hours later, you know, you don't remember it. It's kind of enabling us to keep track of things that we just wouldn't have even worried about the fact we were missing because you just can't do everything, right?
Yeah, and it's such a huge part for me too as well, right? A lot of my daily work, it's conversational based, right? I'm talking to people either, they're frustrated with a situation and they really want to be heard, and I want to listen. Like I really want to listen. In that world of like being heard, listening, and taking notes, like you're multitasking again as a human, which just impacts your ability to be as present as you might want. Where now I'm sort of like everything that we're focused on is just let's focus on the conversation because I know there's an audit trail that exists that I can go back and even double check what I think I heard and hear it again. Just if it's something that's maybe high stakes or a situation, or did I really hear that correctly? Which is for me almost invaluable information, right? To help either the team or help myself make decisions. And it just removes anxiety from all of these things because I'm like, oh yeah, it's there. I've got this virtual buddy that's just riding along and they don't necessarily have an opinion. They're just capturing everything, and then I can formulate my opinions afterwards, right? And um, again, that just allows me to almost feel like even if I am back to back for 4 hours, that it's okay because when I have my 30-minute break to synthesize or do the action, like the pulling things together, the quality of information I have to do that work is just so much higher, as an example, right? And that's just simple things. I'm also dyslexic. So, like I use various different mail tools where I can either type or talk what I want to say, and I know grammatically now I never have to worry, is there a typo in this? Which again, for me was a huge inhibitor. If I was writing a high stakes email, it sort of detracts from the email if someone who reads it sees typos in it. They sort of get this feeling, true or not, that you sort of rushed putting it together, or you didn't pay attention to it. And again, all of that anxiety for me now is gone about worrying, seeing spelling mistakes on high stakes emails that I would have made before. That's gone, right? And I find this ability to have like a thought partner when I try to put out what I'm thinking and then challenge it to sort of improve my grammar, be more concise. All the time, I feel like I'm sent back a prototype of what I want to create, like a first working version of it. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good, but it gets me iterating, which for me is this like huge part of creation. Like I actually find sometimes the act of creation can take so long, and then you're trying to iterate and improve. Now I feel like I can get my first bad version of anything, whether it's an email, a document, a design, a strategy, and then I'm in iteration mode and improvement mode in moments, right? And again, for me, that is a huge efficiency. So again, it's not that the machine is coming up with the answers, it's giving me feedback to sort of improve my work. And for me, again, that just makes I feel like the quality bar then of what I create goes higher quicker, which again is fascinating to me because the good old days of having to type out a strategy or copy a slide from a different presentation and sort of just do the same stuff but spin it in a different way, like that sort of, I've moved way past that now. I can really use all these different communication modes that I have that are stronger modes for me than typing and get more leverage.
I think it's interesting. I've used it to get rid of anxiety. So I'm a native English speaker from the United States, but living in Germany, and I was going to the Italian embassy for me and my son's ID card yesterday. And so I'm in a lot of situations as a not fluent speaker. I've studied both German and Italian, but I'm not a fluent speaker. So one thing I've started doing is before I go into a new situation, I'll ask it for 30 phrases I'll probably hear, throughout that conversation that are maybe things that I wouldn't have studied or I should be aware of, and then I'll go through them with it. So I can sort of be ready for things and reduce anxiety there. The other interesting thing you're saying about made me think about something that is easy to worry about when you're using new tools that can go multi-threaded, which is I actually feel like I'm less multitasking because once you set them on those threads and they can go do them, you kind of don't have to worry about them right when it's finished either. You kind of know you can kind of multitask less, or I'm kind of using it to multitask less because I'll set those threads and then when they come back, I'll do, I'll kind of batch them. I'll do a bunch of the coding ones or I'll do a bunch of writing ones together. So it kind of gives you the ability to structure your time in a way that was I found sort of hard before.
I think that's a massive insight for folks too as well, right? Like maybe people who don't work in software, just to even explain this idea of multi-threading. Multi-threading is this ability to do tasks in parallel, right? So as a human, that's sort of physically impossible. Like that's not true. I can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time, but I certainly can't write code and do a strategy document and reply to an email at the same time. What we're talking about here is the ability where you can isolate those tasks and set the context and the objective and the outcome you're aiming for, and then set the tools off to go and execute those tasks. And it takes time to compute it, to process it, and return a result, right? So you can spend time focused on a batch, which might say, I'm going to focus on a batch of strategy documents that I need to work on for these 4 startups. I'm going to spend time on each one. I'm going to hit sort of execute task. and then they'll go off and do their magic for, it might be 10 minutes, it might be 40 minutes, and return results. And in the meantime, then I can shift my focus for the next hour, 2 hours on another set of tasks that could be similar, like replying to a sets of emails, or it could be, a various different tasks that you want to just dial your mind into. Oh, I'm in a context here like this, right? So for many people, I feel like they sort of love the idea of that ability to sort of batch and have like an hour, 90 minutes, or I have this like little timer on my desk, that I hit, and maybe some people do Pomodoros. It's set to 25 minutes where I can batch in these moments where I'm like, right, I'm going to focus on this for the next while. But in the background, the machines are running, complex tasks for me that will return ultimately a result that I can go back and look at. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the tasks, right? Even one that we were doing yesterday was working on our website for Nobody Studios. And one of the things we were able to do, and it was quite fun to actually do it with you, is that I had written prompts I was using I call it free GBT, so I was not paying for a license. And I gave it, wrote a whole load of prompts around going across the entire website, interrogating the copyright, the structure, the content, and then comparing it to our pitch deck and comparing it to our company messaging that has been updated, and coming back and giving me guidance on areas that I should focus on, or suggestions, recommendations, and everything from site structure, content layout, imaging, the whole lot. Right. So I was doing that on free GBT. And because you were online, and I know you've got, the mega package, like the deep research, I was like, hey, can you run these prompts for me and see what you get? Which again was super fun to compare and contrast the outputs, because they had emphasis in different areas. My GBT took, I think, maybe 6 minutes to run. I think yours took maybe 12 or 14 or something like this, maybe longer. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think yours was only 11 or 12 minutes.
Okay, great.
Fairly quick.
Fairly quick, yeah. But the volume of information, I think, relative to what the deep research, I think it sent like pages of feedback to me, where free GBT sent me like basically summaries of everything. But again, even just that, the going through that process was kind of fascinating, right? Because for me to do that myself, I couldn't even read the whole website in 7 minutes. Never mind, like, start to look for the inconsistencies. And the efficiency was then that I was able to turn that project around in pretty much about 4 or 5 hours and write the code on WordPress, which I haven't used in ages, and got stuck. And you were able to send me guidance on how to use one of the libraries that was loaded on our WordPress that I had no idea how to use, So, my skills from, copywriter to engineer were basically, I only had to ask, typically I would have been stuck there going, where's my WordPress developer? And hours of reading copy. And we turned that around in basically 4 hours, give or take, which is just mind-blowing for me. So what about you from a more engineering side? What were some of the things that your experience, or the examples, and maybe that you think the industry might need to unlearn about going about doing those types of assignments?
I think that the biggest thing I'm unlearning is that I don't just try and ignore your Slack messages, because because so I was thinking about this example yesterday, because what I was able to do with that WordPress plugin. So people come to me with all kinds of questions, and I'm used to that. And at my last job, for instance, um, most of our developers were in a European time zone, and I was in an American time zone. And we had a lot of repositories that my teams owned. So know I didn't know all the repositories that well. It was like 89 repositories or something on my teams, and like, but on a Friday afternoon, I would be the only person working, or me and one other person in the American office would be working. And it was 9 or 10 PM where the devs were. So I didn't, like, wanna ruin their Friday night over some tiny bug, right? That was a client was having a problem with, but it was probably not to the level where, I should, you know, stop someone from running their Friday night. So I would have to go to the repo, figure out the architecture they had used in a particular way. Maybe it was even old, so maybe no one on the team even
Yeah,
was
absolutely.
still there. So that would take me kind of an hour to figure out what was going on, and then I'd figure out the bug, and then that would take 15 minutes to an hour depending on the complexity, right? And then I would push it, and then I hadn't gotten any of my work done on the Friday afternoon. So now, um, with these code base where bots, I just immediately can, like I said yesterday, I just handled some bugs without even thinking about it. And that's been the same thing with people coming to me with questions. Because maybe I have more context than you around how the WordPress stuff was set up because last year I helped out with some stuff on that site, but I didn't really remember that plugin. All I remembered about that plugin was kind of I didn't know how it worked very well. Yeah. But I went to, I think O3 and just asked it, I took pictures, and said, "Where do we click in this picture?" And it was able to figure out what you should do. I said, "I think it's this plugin. Here's these pictures. What do we click on?" And it told me exactly what to tell you, which meant that neither of us kind of like and, what would have happened before, we're in different time zones, but if we were in the same office, we would have just stood there together for half an hour and both been confused and just clicked on something until one of us found it. So, like, it has really changed how you can approach helping people, I guess,
Yep.
because you don't necessarily have to, backlog things that you would've. It doesn't mean you can do everything at that exact moment, but it gives you a higher level of confidence about what you can do and when, and how you can approach it, and whether you can because while we were doing that, I also had, 2 or 3 bots writing code, right? And it's how it's changed the way I prepare. It changes the way you can prepare for things too. Like, I prepared for this, by by putting together a canvas and figuring out kind of things I didn't wanna miss. Like, it kind of changes my approach to research first rather than guessing first, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, right? And for me too, as well, like that experience of working on trying to, like, typically I would have just looked, and I was looking at this WordPress plugin going, I'm going to break something. I don't know how to use it. Anxiety high. But now after this experience, like my first port of call now is not to get on Slack and ping yourself or a technical member who's busy. Is like, I might be able to solve this myself, and then this ability to sort of learn in situ with the co-pilot, like, again, this is a really unique thing because now, I know it might be a small technical example, but now I don't need a web resource to implement changes on a website. I can do all of that myself. I actually know now how to do the copy, do the design, ask for guidance on using frameworks I don't understand, and I can execute like 95% probably of the tasks I might need to do. Sure, like I might know how to, optimize the pages correctly, or make sure that there's some deeply technical aspects to our website. But for me to make the aesthetic changes and layout design and add forms or page, like that, I'm actually super confident to do that now. I'm actually even more confident because I know I have a co-pilot. And it's really like if I got really stuck, that encourages me then to like reach out to someone with more technical expertise than me, right? And that's bar lifting and capability building, both for myself personally and for the company, and those kind of things then, and so you don't have to be pulled out of your context as much, and you can focus on the tasks you're doing. You're not like, as you described, even in your earliest days, the one person who knows a bit about tech. So every single person is knocking on your desk going, hey, can you, fix it? trivial thing for me when you're working on deeply technical tasks, right? And that context switch is expensive, right? Like if we were both sitting at a desk for 30 minutes, that's expensive. We're not working on other things, So I think that's the power of the compounding nature of these effects, where people become more empowered, they become more confident, they have co-pilots to help them. And, ultimately we all feel better because I feel like I have more capabilities now that I can offer and be self-sufficient and do my job better. Right. And like, that's awesome. I just think what we're getting more and more back is like high leverage of our time, doing the more creative, complex, difficult work. That's actually the most enjoyable part for me. And finding ways to have off ramps for the more administrative, repeatable, important disciplines that you instill in how you do things. And to me, like, that's a gift, and it's certainly, I feel like most people haven't even opened Pandora's box on this stuff yet, which again is fascinating.
Not even the kind of full way we could have done it. So like even now I'll use something like ChatGPT Operator, or you could use something like Browser MCP, which are tools that you give a question to, and then they'll actually just go through the website itself and figure it out. I use that for everything from finding hotel rooms for Easter to buying socks, or looking for things on websites that I don't know exactly where they are, because it'll just go through it for you from a single prompt or a set of discussions. So we're even kind of moving beyond you even needing to figure that out already, or we're sort of beyond that with some of the tools now, which is really great because then you can just say, I need to do this, and you can give it to one of those tools. There's a number of tools on the market to use, but yeah, where it can just take over a browser, make decisions, and that gets rid of some of the anxiety too, well, because you don't have to sort of click on things, and it keeps you at a point where you can even watch it, if you're trying to understand what it's doing. This is an interesting thing that I've noticed that we haven't talked about, which is there's ways in which I feel like I'm learning more. I know that sometimes people are worried that with AI, they're gonna not learn how things work, but I feel like part of staying at that kinda higher level for me has been, while it's working, if there's something it's having trouble with, or there's something sort of architectural or strategy-wise that I'm trying to understand, I'm spending more time reading and thinking and sort of synthesizing information, as opposed to, I don't feel like personally I learn as much when I'm kind of doing the thing
Yeah,
repetitively.
executing. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's another part of it that can be underestimated, is how much it can lead to you kind of understanding more.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I keep experiencing this really interesting pushback on that because people feel like they need to be busy. And for me, the power of automation is that it takes away the repeatable, laborious, solved work. And again, like, this is one of the fun questions I like to ask myself is, how much is that worth? How much of my time is worth me being in these creative and complex spaces where I'm synthesizing and reading and discovering versus executing? And then the question, when I sometimes say to people, like, you could buy a tool set for $300 a month that would move your sort of, if people want to think very simply that you're 50% executing and 50% strategizing, which I don't think people are. I actually think it's more like 70% executing, 30% strategizing. But if you could move that dial, that you're leveraging yourself, where you're using more of your creativity, more of your strategic thinking, and the execution, for the most part, to a certain standard, is being taken care of. Like, how much of a leveraged entity am I at that point? And that is worth way more than $300 a month, right? That time that I get to spend on the creative, complex, sort of unrepeatable work. But most people still, when I say this to them, they're like, no, I couldn't spend $200 a month on a tool like that. I couldn't, that's a waste of money, So
Mhm.
it's really fascinating, I think, just seeing how our psyche has to change about how we think about this, that like people are taking jobs away, people are taking agency away. If anything, I'm probably experiencing the opposite of that. I feel like I'm able to think about higher order problems and tasks and solutions, which means I'm being way more creative and efficient in my mind.
Mhm.
And it sounds like that's something you're experiencing too.
Yeah, when I decided to get pro, my wife was also a technology leader at a big, consulting firm, Accenture. And what we sort of discussed was, how do we prove that it's worth it? And we sort of came up with ways of figuring out, like, how it would save us more than it was costing, and it was kind of immediate that we discovered that it was saving us a lot more money than it was costing us in terms of figuring out bookings, in terms of figuring out stuff to buy for our kid, in terms of sort of capabilities, in terms of the time it gave us back, which is huge with 2 technology leaders, right? Because there's always ways to be more busy. So, yeah, we kind of went through that exercise, and it wasn't, at least for us, it wasn't even close. The sort of time and energy and cost savings that sort of brought us, just having, yeah, not just ChatGPT Pro, but I have I've had some other coding tools and stuff. But yeah, it just kind of changes. So that's, maybe not start with Pro, but I would encourage people to try the free, and then, whichever sort of stack they're in, if it's Microsoft or Google or wanna use ChatGPT, just try it out some. And the other part I would say is, like, at first, I would notice, and that was I went kind of all in all at once, and that was kind of a strategic decision. But one thing I've learned is that between the memory tools that they now have, where it remembers how to interact with you and what you have, so, like, it helped me buy an air fryer, and now it knows which air fryer I have, and I just take pictures of foods we buy and say, "How long do I cook this for?" And it does it. It's kind of like throughout any full product life cycle, you start to discover ways to use it more efficiently. But kind of if your first or second or third prompt, isn't isn't great, I'd encourage people to kind of keep drilling down on their problems.
Yeah, no, great advice. Yeah, I was going to ask you what are your tips for people getting started, but you've already shared those. So, what are you most excited about then in the future? What are some of the tools that you can see are coming down the highway? It could even be in the next, it feels like I used to say in the next year, but I feel like a year in this world is like a lifetime. So, what are some of the tools that you're most excited about and looking forward to seeing evolve?
So it's funny because I love some of the bigger tools, the multimodal. So in terms of being able to give images and documents and get back images and documents, that's great. But I'm also very excited for some of the smaller tools and the agent to agent work. So more specialization is really interesting to me. And for example, the Codex tool the ChatGTP just came out with, which is primarily, you give it your code and a prompt, and it comes back with something, and then it flows into your other development tools, as well as, in project management, there's more, and in, sales and other fields, there's more small tasks it'll do for you along the way, and then passing that off to other agents is gonna be really, really interesting over the next year as we get not from just agentic to where, your whole team is working together more seamlessly. And along with that, the more personalization, which is sort of currently happening. But I think what's going to be interesting is the new ways. It's kind of like anything in technology. People come up with it in labs and in offices in Silicon Valley and other places. And then it gets kind of out into the world and you discover, and kind of once it gets to non-technologists, they start discovering things that technologists never thought of, and that really helps. So I feel like as adoption grows, especially around tools, I'm really excited for the new tools we're going to discover we should have made already. I think that's going to be a really fun thing to do.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. No, I'm looking forward to, as you say, the novelty as more people start to use these in interesting and unthought of ways that we're currently in. Listen, Jeremy, it's been great to have you on the show. I'm definitely going to get you back again. I think just the speed of these things changing and also how we're using them both in our own lives and in the studio, just professionally, personally, is just fascinating. And appreciate you sharing like just tons of examples, because I think that's what helps make it real to people at the moment. So yeah, great having you on the show, and thanks very much for sharing.
Thanks so much for listening. If you found this episode useful, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please consider leaving a rating or review, as it helps others find our podcast. For more episode and details about the show, visit barryoreilly.com, and we'll see you on the next episode.